I stared at the twinkling tree, my fingers still dusted with flour from the cookies I baked for a family that no longer wanted me. "Don't come for Christmas," my son had said, his voice colder than the Vermont snow outside, after 3 jobs to put him through college, after co-signing the loan that built his perfect house, after 47 years of being his mother. He thought I'd just disappear quietly. He forgot one thing: the mortgage still has my name on it. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Evelyn carefully hung the last of the ornaments on the tree, her hands moving with the practiced grace of someone who had spent countless hours decorating this small Vermont cottage over the years. The lights twinkled softly, casting a warm, golden glow across the room. The scent of pine mixed with the faint aroma of cookies baking in the oven. The room, small but cozy, felt like a safe haven from the world outside, a place of peace and warmth. It was exactly what she needed, especially with Christmas just around the corner. She took a step back, admiring the tree. It was beautiful, in its own humble way. The handmade ornaments, some glittered, others simple wooden stars, each held a memory, each one a piece of her life. She ran her fingers gently along the rough edges of the glass and wood, remembering when Connor had made them as a child. Her heart swelled with both pride and sadness. It felt right. It felt like home. Her gaze flickered to the phone on the table. It was silent, and she was grateful for that. After all, she had everything she needed right here: the tree, the warmth, and the memories. She could pretend, for a moment, that things were still the same, that everything was okay. But then the phone rang. Evelyn's chest tightened when she saw the name on the screen: Connor, her son. Her heart fluttered, a mixture of hope and fear, as she reached for the phone. The light from the tree seemed to flicker around her as she answered. "Hello, sweetheart," Evelyn said, her voice softer than she intended, trying to sound as calm as possible despite the growing unease in her chest. "Hey, Mom," Connor's voice came through, distant and cold, far more formal than usual. "We need to talk about Christmas." The words hit Evelyn like a cold wave. She clenched the phone tightly, a slight tremor in her hands that she tried to mask. "Of course, darling. What's going on?" There was a long pause. Then Connor spoke again, his words careful and rehearsed. "We, well, we don't want you to come for Christmas this year. Vanessa and I have other plans, and it's not the right time." Vanessa. Evelyn felt a sharp pang at the mention of her daughter-in-law. She could almost hear the laughter in the background, the way Vanessa always laughed like she was the center of everything. It was a sound Evelyn had tried to accept over the past few years, but right now it felt like a cruel echo. Evelyn pressed her hand to her chest as if the gesture could steady her heart. She didn't know how to respond. "I see," she said, her voice trembling slightly despite her best efforts. She gripped the phone tightly, trying to suppress the sudden ache that rose in her throat. "I just wanted to be there for Christmas, to be with you both." "Yeah, I know, Mom." Connor's voice softened a little, but there was no warmth behind it. "But this year, it's just too much. We need some space. It's not personal." Space. The word stung more than anything he could have said. Not personal, but it was personal. It was her. The mother who had spent years doing everything she could to hold her family together. The mother who had tried to be there, even when it felt like no one wanted her around. Now, she wasn't even invited for Christmas. Evelyn swallowed hard, feeling the sharpness of the rejection pierce through her. She wanted to argue, to fight for her place in their lives. But she knew better. She had spent too many years learning that silence was the best response when words failed. "Okay," she said, her voice low and steady, though her heart was shattering. "I understand. Take care of yourselves." There was a brief, awkward silence before Connor spoke again, his voice strained. I'll talk to you soon, Mom. Take care." The call ended before she could say anything more. Evelyn lowered the phone slowly, staring at the screen as if it might magically light up with some other message, some other hope that would undo what had just been said. But the phone remained dark and silent, the weight of the words Connor had spoken pressing down on her chest like a heavy stone. She didn't move for several long moments. The fire crackled quietly in the background, the only sound in the otherwise still room. Her eyes turned to the tree again, the ornaments hanging like fragile memories in the soft glow of the lights. She had poured so much love into this, so much care. But now it felt hollow. The house, the tree, even the sweet scent of pine, it all felt like a reminder of everything she had lost. Evelyn sank down into the armchair next to the tree, her eyes brimming with tears she refused to let fall. The quiet was oppressive now. It was a silence that rang louder than any words could. She looked out the window, where the snow was falling gently, blanketing the world outside in white. It seemed so peaceful, so untouched. And for a moment she thought of how she too had been left out in the cold, just like the snow. But then, something shifted. The sting of humiliation began to fade, replaced by something deeper, sharper. A realization. She had spent so many years trying to fit into a life that no longer included her. Trying to be a part of something that had moved on without her. And maybe, just maybe, it was time for her to stop trying. The fire crackled again, snapping her back to the present. Evelyn took a slow, steady breath. For the first time, she realized she wasn't going to beg for a place at their table anymore. Christmas would go on, with or without her, and she would find her way through it. The floor of Evelyn's study was littered with stacks of old paperwork, bills, receipts, tax forms, and files that had accumulated over the years, each one a small marker of the life she had tried to build. The desk was buried under more clutter, a forgotten coffee mug, loose pens, and half-finished notes. The dim light from the overhead lamp cast long shadows across the room as Evelyn sat hunched over, her fingers moving mechanically through the papers. She could feel the weight of the years in each document she pulled from the box, each page a reminder of everything she had given to create the life Connor now lived. Her fingers stopped at a yellowed envelope, frayed at the edges. She pulled it out slowly, her breath catching as she read the name on the outside, "Mortgage Agreement." Her mind flashed back to that day so many years ago. She had been standing in the small, crowded bank office with Connor beside her, feeling the heat of the manager's dismissive gaze. Connor had been so sure, so confident, but the bank had said no. He didn't have enough credit, not enough of a financial history. Vanessa, standing beside him, had tried to hide the tension in her smile as the manager's decision sealed their fate. And that was when Evelyn had stepped in. She could still hear the words echoing in her mind. "I'll co-sign." The memory hit like a punch to the gut. She had thought it was temporary. Connor had promised he'd pay her back as soon as he was stable. It was a gesture of love, one she hadn't questioned at the time. But now, as she sifted through the mortgage papers, the numbers felt like cold weight in her chest. Her signature was there, clear as day. Her name on the line, tied to every payment, every interest rate, every loan. Evelyn traced the bold numbers printed on the page, her mind racing. The loan wasn't paid off yet, not even close. And now, after everything, after the years of sacrifices, of waitressing and cleaning jobs to put Connor through college, of putting food on the table when things were tight, this was how she was repaid. This was the distance between them. Her fingers trembled as she pulled the numbers from a ledger and began to calculate. The total was staggering, too high for her to ignore. too high for her to not wonder if she had been taken for granted. How much longer until they forget everything I've done for them? The thought hovered in her mind like a storm cloud. Her breath quickened as she tried to push it away, but it lingered, thickening the air around her. Evelyn shifted her gaze back to the mortgage papers. The loan was still active, her name still tethered to it. There was no escaping the cold reality. The years of work, the promises, the sacrifices, none of it seemed to matter now. She could feel the sting of betrayal deep in her bones. A soft knock on the door broke her reverie. "Evelyn? You in there?" Marjorie's voice called from the other side. Evelyn blinked, startled, before the door creaked open. Marjorie stood in the doorway, her concerned eyes scanning the room. She was a few years older than Evelyn, with a silver streak in her hair and a no-nonsense attitude that Evelyn had always admired. Marjorie stepped into the room, noticing the piles of paper on the floor, the worn look on Evelyn's face. "Looks like a bomb went off in here," Marjorie remarked, trying to break the tension with a light chuckle. But Evelyn didn't smile, she didn't even move. She simply stared at the papers, her gaze distant. "Everything okay?" Marjorie's voice softened as she sat down across from Evelyn, her eyes sharp with concern. Evelyn swallowed hard, her throat tight. She felt exposed, like everything she had tried to hold in was suddenly laid bare. She didn't want to admit it, didn't want to admit how deeply the rejection from Connor had cut, how it had stirred up old wounds. How, in the quiet of her home, with only the fire for company, she was starting to realize how forgotten she was. "They've forgotten who made that house possible," Evelyn whispered, her voice barely audible. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. Marjorie's expression softened. "Evelyn." "I co-signed that mortgage," Evelyn continued, her eyes fixed on the papers as if they held all the answers. "I worked 3 jobs to make sure Connor could get through college. I put everything I had into him, into them, and now—" Her voice faltered as the weight of it all crashed down again. "Now I'm nothing. Not even invited for Christmas." Marjorie's eyes softened with sympathy, but she didn't say anything for a moment. She knew better than to offer empty words of comfort. Evelyn wasn't asking for sympathy. She was asking for recognition, acknowledgement. Evelyn finally met Marjorie's gaze. "I was never supposed to be just a stepping stone," she whispered, a crack in her voice that she couldn't hide. "I was supposed to be family." The silence hung between them, thick and heavy. Marjorie's face softened, but she didn't respond right away. Instead, she reached across the table and gently took Evelyn's hand in hers. "You've done enough," Marjorie said softly, the words almost like a prayer. "You've given more than enough." But Evelyn didn't feel it. She didn't feel like she'd given enough. Not anymore. The house, the loan, the years of sacrifice. They were nothing now. Everything she had poured into her son, into his life, seemed to evaporate in the cold silence of Christmas, in the absence of her family's love. The fire crackled again, but the warmth of the room couldn't touch the chill that had settled in her heart. Evelyn squeezed Marjorie's hand, but even her friend's steady presence couldn't ease the growing weight in her chest. Something had changed, and Evelyn knew, deep down, that she couldn't go on pretending anymore. Not for Connor, not for Vanessa, and not for Christmas. It was time to face the truth, and she would, one way or another. Evelyn pushed open the heavy glass doors of Burlington Bank, the cool air from outside giving way to the sterile warmth of the lobby. The sharp scent of polished marble and freshly printed paper filled her senses. Her heels clicked against the floor, a rhythmic sound that seemed to echo in the otherwise quiet space. It was a world far removed from the emotions she had been wrestling with for days, yet somehow it was the one she now had to enter. She walked up to the desk where Thomas Parker, the bank manager, was seated, his gaze lifting in mild surprise as he saw her approach. He had always been cordial, but there was a moment of hesitation now, like he was unsure what to make of her presence. "Mrs. Aldridge," he said, standing. "How can I help you today?" "I need to speak with you about Connor's mortgage," Evelyn said, her voice steady, but with an undercurrent of something sharp that even she recognized. "I believe my name is still on it." Thomas looked at her, slightly taken aback, and then quickly turned to his computer, his fingers tapping across the keys. "Yes," he said, pulling up the details. "I see you're still listed as the guarantor. I didn't realize you were still tied to the loan. I thought it would have been cleared by now." Evelyn's heart tightened at his words. Still tied to it. She had signed the papers, agreed to help Connor and Vanessa, thinking it was a temporary gesture. But now, the weight of that responsibility hit her harder than she expected. The ties hadn't loosened. They had only grown stronger. "No," Evelyn replied, forcing the words out. "It hasn't been paid off yet." Thomas's brow furrowed slightly. "Well, as the guarantor, you're still legally responsible for the balance of the loan," he said, his voice now tinged with concern. "If the loan defaults, you'll be on the hook." Her fingers curled around the edge of the desk, her mind racing. She had always assumed she was a passive figure in this agreement, simply helping her son when the bank had turned him away. But now, she realized the reality. She had the power. Her signature could make or break the future Connor had built. The house, the mortgage, everything. It could all come crashing down because of the decision she had made years ago. Thomas continued, unaware of the shift inside Evelyn. "I should inform you that if foreclosure becomes necessary, it would ruin Connor's credit. It would take years for him to recover from something like that." He looked at her, his expression softening. "That's not something anyone would want." Evelyn's gaze hardened. She thought of all the Christmases spent pretending everything was fine, pretending her sacrifices hadn't gone unnoticed. Now, it wasn't just about the money, it was about something much deeper. "Then maybe it's time for him to face the consequences," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying an icy certainty. Thomas blinked at her, momentarily caught off guard by the coldness of her tone. He seemed ready to argue, to advise against it, but Evelyn was already moving past him, her thoughts crystallizing with each word. She stood up, her mind clear now, no longer clouded by doubts. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Parker," she said, her voice firm and final. "I'll take it from here." She turned and walked toward the door, the weight of her decision beginning to sink in. As the door swung closed behind her, the cool air hit her face, but it didn't numb the sharp clarity in her mind. For the first time in years, Evelyn felt something stir deep inside, a sense of control, of power. The same power she had given away so freely, so willingly, was still hers to wield. She had been the one to co-sign. She had been the one to hold the strings of their lives in her hands all along. And now, it was time to reclaim what had been taken from her. The decision was made. Connor's world, his carefully constructed house of cards, was about to fall. And Evelyn, for the first time in a long while, was no longer a passive observer. She was the one who would decide how it all ended. Evelyn sat in the quiet of her living room, the fire flickering softly beside her, casting warm shadows on the walls. But the heat from the flames couldn't chase away the cold gnawing inside her. She reached for her phone, swiping the screen, her fingers hesitating for just a moment before opening the Instagram app. Her thumb moved automatically, scrolling past the posts that had come to define the life she had been excluded from. There it was, Vanessa's latest post. A pristine holiday table, surrounded by an extravagantly decorated home. The tree shimmered with expensive ornaments, The room bathed in a golden glow from chandeliers that sparkled as if they were straight out of a magazine. Vanessa was in the frame too, a smile bright on her face, her perfectly manicured nails gently holding a glass of champagne. Evelyn's heart twisted as she stared at the image. The house was beautiful, polished, everything she had wanted for her son and daughter-in-law. But it was also a lie, a gleaming facade hiding the truth. She swiped through more photos, new luxury purchases, exotic vacations, and an endless parade of high-end brands. Everything was perfect, shiny, and so far removed from the truth she knew, the truth that only she understood. Behind the glamour, they were drowning. Overdue bills had piled up in the corners of her mind ever since their last conversation. She had seen the warning signs, Connor's hesitations when talking about finances, the vague explanations Vanessa offered about unexpected costs. The truth was slowly making itself clear now, despite the flawless images Vanessa painted online. And now, here it was again. A text from Connor. "Hey Mom, we're in a tough spot. Can you help with a small bridge loan?" The words felt like a slap. Evelyn's fingers hovered over the screen, her mind a swirl of conflicting emotions. The request was innocent enough, a subtle ask for more help, a request for the small loan that could keep them afloat for just a little while longer. But Evelyn's stomach churned. She knew it wasn't a small thing. It was a request for her to rescue them once again, to prop up the life they had created at her expense. She had been doing it for years, funding their hopes, their dreams, their mistakes. Without responding, she pressed the delete button. The message vanished from the screen, a clean break, but the weight of it remained, settling heavily on her chest. A soft knock on the door broke her thoughts. Marjorie stepped into the room, her eyes immediately noticing the tension in Evelyn's posture, the set of her jaw. "You okay?" Marjorie asked gently, stepping further into the room, concern written all over her face. Evelyn put the phone down, the cold burn of the text still lingering. She glanced at her friend, taking in the concerned expression. "I don't know. Marjorie, I don't know anymore." Marjorie sat down beside her, offering a quiet presence, a friend who didn't need to ask for answers. "You've given them everything," Marjorie said softly, her voice tinged with empathy. "When was the last time you thought about yourself?" The words hit Evelyn with an unexpected force. She had always thought of herself last, her own needs second to Connor's, to Vanessa's, to the sacrifices they required. But Marjorie's question lingered like a weight, something Evelyn had pushed down for too long. "When was the last time I thought about myself?" The thought settled into her mind like a seed, small but growing. Later, Evelyn bundled up in her coat and scarf, stepping out into the crisp, wintry air. The snow had begun to fall lightly, dusting the streets in soft white. She walked through the town square, her footsteps crunching on the fresh snow. The small shops were decorated with festive lights, and the warm glow of store windows beckoned. She passed a family, laughing together, their arms laden with shopping bags. The children tugged at their parents' hands, excited for the holiday season. The sound of their laughter filled the air, bright and innocent, a stark contrast to the emptiness she felt inside. The loneliness cut deeper now, sharper than before. She had always known she was alone, but today, it felt heavier. The weight of it had shifted in a way she hadn't expected. She had spent so many years putting others first, living in the shadows of their expectations, trying to make them happy, and in the process, she had lost herself. Evelyn stopped in the center of the square, watching the families around her, the joy that seemed so distant from her own heart. But something in her had changed. The quiet resolve that had begun to form over the last few days now took root in her chest. She wasn't just a spectator anymore. She wasn't going to let herself be sidelined any longer. With each step she took, the decision solidified. She had been living for everyone else's happiness for so long, putting their needs first, and now it was her turn. Her son had made his choices, and it was time for him to face the consequences. It was time to stop being the one who picked up the pieces. Evelyn turned on her heel, her steps sure and purposeful. She wasn't going to let their perfect, shiny world fool her anymore. This Christmas would be different. The facade had cracked. And so had she. The power, she realized, had always been hers to wield. It was time to reclaim it. The snow had started falling heavier now, turning the world outside into a soft blur of white. Evelyn drove slowly through the quiet streets of the town, the rhythmic swoosh of the windshield wipers the only sound in the car. The glow of streetlights cast long shadows across the road, and her headlights illuminated the swirling flakes that danced around her like ghosts. She had no real destination in mind, just the steady pull of a decision that seemed to lead her here, to this place. Connor's house. She had driven past it many times over the years, always with a sense of pride in her chest. The house she had helped him buy. The house she had painted with her own hands, mixing colors and sanding wood as they worked side by side. It had been a symbol of his success, his future, her investment in him. But now, as she drove past, it felt like a distant memory, a dream she had given so much to, only to watch it turn into something she no longer recognized. As she passed the house, she slowed, the car gently rolling to a stop outside. Through the large front windows, she could see the flickering of warm lights, candles on the mantel, the soft glow of the tree. Vanessa's voice echoed through the windows, laughter ringing out in the cozy space. Friends had gathered, and from the way the room glowed, it looked like they were celebrating. Perfect. Beautiful. The kind of life Vanessa had always wanted, always expected. But it wasn't real. Evelyn could see the figure of Vanessa moving around the room, her back to the window, as she handed out drinks to the guests, the smile on her face like a mask. Connor was there too, but he was tense, his shoulders hunched as if he were trying to shrink away from everything. He didn't seem to belong there, his gaze darting nervously toward the window every so often, like he knew Evelyn was just outside, watching. Evelyn's grip tightened on the steering wheel. The cold leather dug into her palms, the pressure making her knuckles ache. She stared at the house, the walls she had once helped paint, the floors she had helped sand. All of this, she thought, was supposed to be theirs to build, to share. But now she was just an observer, a ghost outside their perfect life. She exhaled slowly, her breath fogging up the windshield for a moment before it cleared. And then, through the glass, she heard a laugh. A cruel joke coming from Vanessa, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Isn't it just like her?" Vanessa's voice said, the words muffled but unmistakable. "To think that she could fix everything. She's always been so good at cleaning up messes." Evelyn's chest tightened. She felt the sting of those words like a slap, her breath catching in her throat. Cleaning up messes. That was all she had been to them, wasn't it? A fixer, a problem solver, always cleaning up after their mistakes. They didn't know how to appreciate what she had given, what she had sacrificed. Evelyn muttered to herself, her voice low but filled with bitter resolve. Enjoy it while it lasts. She let the words hang in the air between her and the house. She wasn't sure if she meant it for Vanessa, for Connor, or for herself. But the words felt right. They had built this world on her back. It was time to let it crumble. As she finally turned the car around and drove away, the house receded in her rearview mirror, growing smaller and smaller in the distance. The snow continued to fall, a soft veil over the world. But as Evelyn drove on, the weight of the decision she had made settled deeper into her chest. They had their perfect facade, but she would no longer be the one holding it up. Evelyn walked into the bank again, the heavy doors closing behind her with a soft whoosh. The air inside was cool, the scent of paper and polished wood mingling with the sharp bite of winter still clinging to her coat. The lobby was quiet, save for the low hum of conversations at distant desks and the rhythmic tapping of keyboards. It was the same world she had entered before, but now, everything felt different. Her footsteps were slow and deliberate as she made her way to the front desk, where Thomas Parker stood, looking up with a slightly surprised but cautious expression. The last time they spoke, there had been a sense of professional detachment, but now the air between them was heavier, charged with unspoken understanding. "Mrs. Aldridge," Thomas greeted her, his voice careful. "How can I help you today?" "I need to talk about the foreclosure process," Evelyn said, her voice steady, but carrying a weight that pressed down on her chest. Thomas's expression shifted subtly, the lines of his face tightening as he motioned for her to follow him to his office. The space felt familiar now, too familiar, like she was walking through a door she had never truly left. Once inside, Thomas gestured for her to sit, his fingers resting on the edge of the desk as he looked at her with concern. "I have to warn you, Mrs. Aldridge, foreclosure is not a simple process. It's severe. There's the public notice, the risk of financial ruin, the damage to credit that can last for years. It's a very serious step." Evelyn sat in the chair, her back straight, her hands resting on her lap. The words hit her, but they didn't carry the same weight they had before. This wasn't about saving Connor anymore. It was about reclaiming her life. "Connor told me not to come for Christmas," Evelyn said quietly, her voice barely a whisper. "He made it clear he didn't want me there." She met Thomas's gaze, her eyes unwavering. "So I'm here now, making the decision for him." Thomas didn't respond right away, his lips pressed together as he studied her. There was a flicker of sympathy in his eyes, but also a caution, as if he knew the storm Evelyn was stepping into. "I understand," he said softly. "But you need to be sure. This decision doesn't just affect him. It's public. It's painful." Evelyn's fingers brushed over the papers on the desk. The preliminary foreclosure forms sat in front of her, waiting. She had come here for answers, for clarity. But now she understood. The decision had already been made long ago. She had given him everything, and now she was taking it back. With a steady hand, Evelyn signed the papers. The sound of the pen scratching against the form was sharp in the silence, a finality that echoed through the room. Thomas handed her the completed forms, his gaze lingering on her for a moment, as though he wanted to say something more, but he didn't. Instead, he gave her a tight, polite nod. Evelyn stood, the papers cold in her hand, a weight she could now carry with her. As she turned to leave, the faint chime of distant church bells rang through the air. They echoed through the snow-covered town outside, a soft, melancholy sound that settled over her heart like a blanket. She stepped out of the bank, the cold air hitting her face like a sharp reminder of everything she had left behind. The snow continued to fall, the world outside blanketed in white. She could hear the bells still, their sound mingling with the rhythm of her steps. The course was set now. There was no going back. For the first time in a long while, Evelyn felt a sense of purpose settle over her, one she hadn't known she needed but had found all the same. It was done. And as she walked into the snow, she knew that whatever came next, it would be her choice. The house was quiet when Evelyn returned, the snow still swirling outside, casting pale shadows across the room. She set the completed foreclosure papers down on the kitchen table, their edges curling slightly from the cold. The weight of the decision settled heavily on her chest, and she couldn't shake the feeling of doubt that crept in. She walked to the window, looking out at the empty street, the soft light of the street lamps reflecting off the snow like a dream fading in the morning light. Was it too harsh? The question lingered in her mind, repeating like a quiet mantra. She had spent so many years bending, giving, trying to fix things that weren't hers to fix. But had she gone too far this time? Had she made a choice that would tear everything down? Her gaze drifted to the photos on the mantel, images of Connor as a child. She could see him clearly in her mind's eye. The small boy with two big glasses and a smile that never seemed to fade. The boy who used to run to her after school, eager to tell her everything, who would climb into her lap when he needed comfort. The boy she had raised, who had once relied on her for everything. Evelyn pressed a hand to her forehead, a sudden wave of emotion crashing over her. How had it come to this? She walked back to the table, her fingers hovering over the paperwork. A sickening twist of regret coiled in her gut. It was too much, too final. Couldn't she find a way to fix this? Maybe it wasn't too late to undo it. She could tear the papers up, pretend this moment hadn't happened. She could call Connor, apologize for thinking he needed to face consequences. She reached for the papers, the desire to erase the decision almost overwhelming. But then, just as her fingers touched the edge, the thought of Marjorie's voice broke through the haze. Evelyn, remember, Connor made his choice. Marjorie's voice was calm, firm. She had said it before, but this time, the words held a weight that Evelyn couldn't ignore. Connor had made his choice. He had pushed her away, told her not to come for Christmas, cut the ties that had once bound them together. Evelyn lowered her hand and stepped back from the table, the papers still in front of her but no longer a temptation. She wasn't going to undo what she had decided. She had spent too long trying to fix things that were never hers to fix. The wind outside picked up, rattling the windows, and Evelyn felt the chill seep into her bones. She moved to the kettle, pouring hot water into her favorite cup, the one with the chipped handle that had been a gift from Connor when he was young. As the steam rose, she felt the tension in her shoulders ease, even if only for a moment. She took the cup to the small desk by the window and sat down with her journal. The pages were worn, but she knew what she had to write. Her hand moved steadily across the page as she let the words flow, the flickering candlelight casting dancing shadows on the walls. Respect is the only gift I want. She paused, looking at the words. It was simple, but it felt true. She had given everything to her family, her time, her love, her sacrifice. And what had she received in return? Disrespect, rejection. She deserved better. And now, for the first time in years, she was starting to demand it. The kettle whistled softly in the kitchen, and Evelyn closed the journal with a sigh, her mind clearer now. She stood, her fingers gently brushing the journal's cover before walking to the window again. The snow was still falling, but the storm outside seemed less overwhelming now. Her breath fogged up the glass, and she stared out into the white world, her thoughts quieting. By the time dawn crept through the curtains, painting the world in soft hues of gray and pink, Evelyn felt a quiet certainty settle in her chest. She had made the right choice. There was no turning back now. Whatever came next, she would face it on her own terms, and she was ready. As the first rays of light broke through the sky, Evelyn's resolve hardened once more. She would no longer be a passive figure in her own life. It was time to let go and move forward, alone, but stronger than before. Evelyn had barely finished her morning tea when the sharp ring of the doorbell broke the silence. She set the cup down gently, the ceramic clinking lightly against the saucer, and walked to the door with a steady step. She already knew who it was. The tightening in her chest told her that much. When she opened the door, Connor stood in front of her, his expression tense, his jaw set. The sight of him in the doorway, tall and wide-shouldered, still carried an air of authority, but there was something desperate behind his eyes, something more fragile than Evelyn had seen in him for a long time. "Mom," he said, his voice strained, "I need help. It's, it's bad. We've missed some mortgage payments, and if I don't come up with the money, it's all going to fall apart. I need you to lend me the money, just until the next paycheck." His voice faltered as he spoke the words. It was the same pitch he had used years ago when asking for small favors, only now it carried the weight of impending disaster. Evelyn studied him for a moment, her gaze unwavering. The urge to offer him the money, to just make it right, was almost overwhelming. But she didn't. "Come in," she said softly, stepping aside. She didn't need to say much. She had heard enough. Her eyes had already seen the truth, but she knew she had to make him face it. She didn't want to shout, didn't want to raise her voice. There was no need. The decision had been made, and it was time for him to understand that. Connor stepped inside, glancing nervously around, his movements tight and guarded. As soon as the door clicked shut behind him, he turned to face her. His eyes wide with a mix of pleading and frustration. "Please," he said, desperation creeping into his voice. "You don't understand. Vanessa's expenses, they've been piling up. The new furniture, the holidays. I didn't plan for this." His hands rose in a helpless gesture. "I'm trying, Mom. I'm trying to fix this." Evelyn's expression remained calm, but the steady beat of her heart was the only sign of emotion that betrayed her. "You told me not to come for Christmas, Connor," she said, her voice low but firm. "You made it clear. And now, you're asking me for money again." She let the silence stretch between them, the words hanging in the air like an accusation. The weight of them felt heavier than anything she had ever said before. Connor's face paled. The panic flickered in his eyes as he took a step back, his chest rising and falling with a shaky breath. "Mom, I didn't mean it. I was just angry. I didn't mean for it to be like this. Please, please don't do this." But Evelyn didn't soften. She could see it all now, the pattern she had been trapped in for so long. The sacrifices she had made for him and Vanessa, the endless cycle of giving that had led them here, to this exact moment. She had given too much, asked for too little. And now, the truth was that he hadn't even realized how much he had taken. Instead of responding, Evelyn turned away, walking to the kitchen. She motioned for him to follow. "I'll make coffee," she said simply, as though the conversation had already ended. Connor's face twisted with frustration as he followed her into the kitchen, but he didn't argue. He knew the look in her eyes now, the one that said she was done. It was the same look she had worn all those years ago, when he was a child, when he had realized she wouldn't bend anymore. He could feel it now, the shifting of the ground beneath him. Evelyn turned the kettle on, the soft hiss of the water filling the space between them. She moved with purpose, steady, unhurried. "I'm not giving you the money," she said, the words final. "Not this time." She glanced at him as she poured the hot water into the French press, her eyes calm, unwavering. Connor stood frozen, his fists clenched at his sides. He opened his mouth as if to say something more, but no words came out. Instead, he just stared at her, the frustration giving way to fury. "This is your fault," he spat, the words sharp. "If you had been there, if you had just done what I asked, maybe we wouldn't be in this mess. You always think you know better, but you don't." His voice cracked as he yelled. But Evelyn didn't flinch. She didn't move. "Leave," she said quietly, her voice cold. "You're not going to get what you came for?" For a moment, Connor stood still, seething. Then, with a harsh breath, he turned and stormed out of the kitchen. The door slammed shut behind him, the sound reverberating through the house like a final punctuation to their fractured relationship. Evelyn didn't move. She simply poured the coffee into a mug, the warmth of it grounding her. She had done it. She had made the choice. She wasn't going to fix this anymore. The wind howled outside, and she could hear the distant chime of church bells ringing through the snow. The cold, biting air from the window rushed in, but Evelyn stood still, letting it wash over her. The course was set. The Christmas market was bustling with life. A scene straight out of a holiday postcard. Stalls adorned with twinkling lights offered handcrafted gifts, warm cinnamon-scented pastries, and hot, mulled wine. The air was crisp, and laughter echoed through the square as families milled about, their cheeks flushed from the cold. But Evelyn felt the sharp bite of the gossip that hung just beneath the festive facade. She didn't need to look around to know what was being said. She could already feel the weight of the whispers following her as she walked. Vanessa's voice, always the loudest in the room, had been the first to spread the rumors. The stories she told painted Evelyn as unstable, bitter, angry, someone who had never understood her own son's choices. They said Evelyn was the one who had caused the rift between them, that her refusal to help had pushed Connor over the edge. It didn't matter that none of it was true. What mattered was how well the story fit into the narrative Vanessa had carefully woven for herself. As Evelyn walked through the market, she caught snippets of conversations between neighbors. She heard the word bitter again, followed by unstable. Her gaze briefly flicked to the women standing at the stall selling scarves, their voices dropping low when they saw her approach. "She's here again," one of them whispered, glancing at Evelyn with a mixture of judgment and curiosity. Evelyn refused to let their words reach her. She walked with her head held high, her back straight. She had no intention of showing any sign of weakness, no matter how much their words stung. She had done nothing wrong. She had made her choice. And now it was time to live with it. She wasn't going to cower in the shadows anymore. As she passed by them, the women exchanged glances, but Evelyn didn't acknowledge them. She couldn't be bothered with their opinions, their misplaced judgments. The world outside their narrow view didn't concern her. Marjorie stood near the hot chocolate stand, watching her with a proud smile, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup. As Evelyn approached, Marjorie raised her mug in a silent toast, and Evelyn's lips curved in a small but genuine smile. The weight of the rumors was lighter now, a little easier to bear with her friend by her side. "You've got more courage than anyone here," Marjorie said softly, her voice warm and reassuring. Evelyn gave a small nod, the knot of tension in her chest loosening slightly. "I'm done hiding," she replied, her voice steady and resolute. She had faced worse than idle gossip. She had survived far worse. And she wasn't going to let a handful of whispered words bring her down now. As she continued to move through the market, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She ignored it at first, but the persistent vibration reminded her that the world was still pushing at her. She stopped and pulled it from her coat, unlocking it to find an email from Connor. The subject line read simply, "Help me, please." Her fingers hovered over the screen, reading the message once, twice. He begged for money again, citing the pressure from Vanessa's mounting bills and the looming threat of foreclosure. He pleaded with her, asking her to reconsider, to help him and Vanessa get back on their feet. Evelyn stared at the message, her heart tight in her chest. The urge to respond was there, but she didn't. She wasn't going to be dragged back into his world of dependency. She had made her choice. With a deep breath, she set the phone aside, feeling the weight of his words settle inside her for the last time. She wasn't going to help him anymore. Not this way. Not at this cost. Instead, Evelyn focused on her plans. She had been thinking about it for days now, the idea slowly forming in her mind. She would host Christmas dinner, not for the family she had lost, but for the people who had no place to go, for the lonely, for the forgotten. That night, as the wind picked up, Evelyn began making a list. She thought of the elderly woman down the street who had lost her husband that summer, the young man who had just moved to town and hadn't made any friends, the woman with the small children whose husband worked long hours. They would all be invited. Her home, warm and filled with the scent of roasting meat, would be a place for people who knew what it meant to be truly alone. She didn't need Connor. She didn't need Vanessa. She needed to rebuild, to open her heart again to the people who deserved her love and care. And this year she would make a Christmas for herself. A real one. As the evening sky darkened, Evelyn sat at the table, her journal open in front of her. She wrote the first few names on her list, a small smile forming on her lips as she imagined the dinner table full of laughter, real connections, and warmth. And as she put the pen down, she knew that this was just the beginning. The world might have written her off, but she was not done yet. The morning was quiet. The world still shrouded in the soft light of early winter when the courier arrived. He was a middle-aged man in a navy blue jacket, his expression impassive as he stepped out of the delivery van, a thick envelope in hand. He walked up to Connor's house, his footsteps crunching against the snow, and knocked firmly on the door. When no one answered, he placed the envelope carefully on the doorstep, turning and heading back to his vehicle without a glance back. Minutes later, Vanessa stepped out onto the porch, her laughter from the night before still clinging to the air around her. She was mid-sentence when her eyes fell on the envelope. She froze, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. Her hand shook slightly as she reached down to pick it up. Her gaze flicked between the envelope and the house, then to the street where the courier had just vanished, as if the weight of the moment had finally caught up with her. Then, with a scream, she tore the envelope open. "No, no, no, no!" she cried, her voice raw with panic. Her hands trembled as she fumbled with the paper, reading the notice. A mixture of disbelief and fury painted her face, and she stepped back into the driveway, clutching the papers to her chest like a shield. The neighbors were watching. A few had stepped onto their porches, exchanging curious glances, while others stared openly from behind curtains. The scene played out in front of them like a drama they'd all been waiting for, the tension in the air thickening with every second that passed. Inside, Evelyn sat by the window, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of tea, the warmth of it seeping into her fingers. She heard Vanessa's screams from the driveway. The words were muffled, but the anguish was unmistakable. Evelyn let the sound wash over her, unbothered, detached. She had made this decision. She had chosen her own path, and now it was time to let the consequences unfold. Her phone buzzed on the table, the screen lighting up with a string of missed calls from Connor. He had been calling her repeatedly, but she had already made up her mind. She picked up the phone, her fingers hesitating over the screen. She could see the panic in his messages, the pleading for her to intervene, to fix what was falling apart. But she didn't reply. She wouldn't. Instead, she pressed play on the first voicemail. His voice came through, jagged and strained. "Mom, please, please help us. They're going to take the house. You have to do something." The desperation was clear, but Evelyn's heart remained steady, her resolve unwavering. She didn't answer. She wouldn't get pulled back into his world of dependency and excuses. Marjorie had arrived by then, a bottle of red wine in hand, a smile of understanding on her face. She poured them both glasses, her eyes glinting with approval as she handed one to Evelyn. "To strength," she said, raising her glass. Evelyn clinked her glass against Marjorie's, a faint smile curving her lips as the weight of the situation became a little lighter. The taste of the wine was rich, grounding. There was no going back now. She had done what needed to be done. Later that afternoon, the house was filled with a different kind of warmth. Evelyn worked quietly, stringing popcorn garlands with delicate hands, her fingers nimble as she threaded the kernels together, each one another small act of creation. The tree stood in the corner, lit softly, and the scent of fresh pine filled the room. The guests she had invited for Christmas would arrive soon, the ones who, like her, understood what it meant to be on the outside. People who had lost, like her, and were starting over. As she finished the garland, she looked out the window at the snow falling gently outside. The world was quiet now, but Evelyn could feel the shift beneath it, the quiet turning point that would forever change everything. Meanwhile, across town, Connor and Vanessa's marriage began to crack under the pressure. The weight of the foreclosure, the stress of mounting bills, and the sudden realization that their perfect life was crumbling. Together, they could feel the slow unraveling. The cracks in their facade, once hidden beneath layers of charm and glittering social posts, were becoming impossible to ignore. But for Evelyn, that was no longer her problem. She had made her decision. The path was clear. And with each new step she walked further away from the life that had once been. The house was still, the only sound the crackling of the fire in the hearth. Evelyn sat in her armchair, the warm light of the flames dancing on the walls, casting long shadows across the room. On the small table beside her, Connor's childhood Christmas letters lay scattered, their paper yellowing at the edges from years of neglect. She hadn't meant to revisit them, but the act felt unavoidable. She opened the first one, her eyes scanning the familiar, messy handwriting, the words so full of hope and innocence. "Dear Mom, I can't wait for Christmas. I'm going to be so good this year, I promise." The letters were filled with such simple wishes, the kind of requests only a child could make: soft toys, board games, the occasional wish for a pet. Back then, there had been no tension, no expectations of disappointment. There had only been love. Her fingers trembled slightly as she turned the pages. She could almost hear his voice in her mind, calling out to her with a trust so pure, so unguarded. How had it all slipped away so easily? The guilt pierced her, sharp and unexpected. Had she gone too far? The question rose up inside her like a storm, washing over her with a force she hadn't anticipated. Connor needed her, didn't he? Even now, despite everything, wasn't she supposed to be the one to fix things for him, to rescue him as she always had? Her heart twisted at the thought of losing him forever. Would he ever come back to her? Would he ever see her as the mother who had always done her best? Or would he always view her as the one who let him go? She folded the letter in her hands, the paper soft and worn from years of being tucked away in forgotten boxes. The weight of the past hung heavily in the air, but she knew she couldn't linger there. Not now. Not anymore. The doorbell rang, breaking the silence, but Evelyn didn't move. She didn't need to. She could hear Marjorie's familiar steps outside, her soft knock at the door. When Evelyn opened it, her friend's face was calm, her eyes understanding. Marjorie stepped inside without a word, handing her a cup of tea, the warmth of it filling the space between them. "You've done what's best for you," Marjorie said softly, sitting down beside her. "For both of you, really. Respect has to be earned, Evelyn. And sometimes, people need to learn that." Evelyn nodded, the sting of Marjorie's words cutting through her uncertainty. It was true. Connor had made his choices, and she had made hers. She had done enough. More than enough. Later, as the night deepened, Evelyn's mind wandered back to the pile of old letters. Among them, she found a crumpled note she had nearly forgotten. One Vanessa had sent years ago, mocking Evelyn's attempts to be a part of their lives. The words were harsh, biting. "You'll never understand. You're just a burden. Just stay out of it." Vanessa's sharp, condescending tone rang in her ears, each syllable a reminder of the ways she had been rejected, pushed aside. In a quiet, steady motion, Evelyn stood and walked to the fire. She didn't hesitate. With a small, controlled movement, she tossed the note into the flames. The paper curled and darkened, the ink running until it was nothing but ash. Watching it burn, Evelyn felt something shift in her chest, a weight lifting, as if she had let go of something that had been holding her down for far too long. For the first time in weeks, Evelyn felt a flicker of peace settle over her. She sank back into her chair, her eyes closing for a moment as the warmth of the fire surrounded her. The house was silent, save for the crackling flames and the soft hum of the wind outside. When she finally allowed herself to sleep, it was deeper than it had been in months. No dreams of regret, no memories of what had been lost, just the quiet, steady rhythm of her breath and the peace that came from knowing she had made the right choice. Tomorrow would come, and with it, the future. And for once, Evelyn was ready to face it on her own terms. The cottage was alive with the warmth of flickering candlelight and the hum of quiet conversation. Evelyn had borrowed chairs from the neighbors, simple mismatched ones, their wood worn and familiar. The table was crowded with humble, comforting dishes: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and bowls of salad. There was no luxury here, no extravagant spread, but there was a deep, quiet sense of abundance, as if the simple food and simple company could fill the space in a way nothing else could. Her guests trickled in one by one, each bringing a piece of their own history. An elderly widow who lived 2 doors down, her face lined with years of solitude, but her eyes still warm and full of stories. A young veteran who had returned home from service, his shoulders stiff, but his smile genuine. A neighbor who had lost her job and, for reasons she never fully explained, had never celebrated a holiday. They all came, and with them, a sense of belonging that Evelyn hadn't realized she was missing. The sound of laughter filled the air as the evening wore on. It was light and carefree, the kind of joy that Evelyn hadn't known in years. It was a gathering of people who understood loneliness, who knew what it was like to stand on the edge and wonder if there was anyone left to catch them. Now, together, they were filling the silence with something new. Evelyn sat at the head of the table, her heart swelling as she looked around. She had built this. She had created this sense of family, and as the evening unfolded, she could feel it settling into her bones, real and undeniable. She had a new community now. It wasn't the one she had once dreamed of, the one with Connor and Vanessa and the life she had imagined. But it was hers, and it was enough. A soft murmur of contentment filled the room as someone passed the wine, the clink of glasses cutting through the laughter. Evelyn raised her glass, the amber liquid catching the light of the candles. She looked at the faces around the table. These people, who had once been strangers, now the closest thing to family she could imagine. "To new beginnings," she said, her voice steady, her smile gentle but full of meaning. "To new beginnings," they echoed, their voices warm, their faces illuminated by the glow of the fire. Evelyn felt the weight of the last few months lift from her shoulders, replaced by something lighter, freer. But as she raised her glass across town, in a house that now felt hollow and cold, the scene was different. The house that once held laughter and love now echoed with only anger. Connor and Vanessa sat in the dark, the silence between them suffocating. Connor's face was set in anger, his eyes red from the tears he refused to let fall. He scrolled through old photos on his phone, images from past Christmases, Evelyn smiling at him, holding him close, the family he once had. A soft sigh escaped him as he lingered over a picture of them at the kitchen table, Christmas lights twinkling behind them. How had it all gone so wrong? Vanessa, sitting beside him, picked at her fingernails, her expression cold and distant. "You should have just asked her for the money," she said flatly, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "This is your fault. You should have called her earlier." Connor didn't respond. He couldn't bring himself to. The words felt heavy in his chest. All he could do was stare at the photo of him as a child, his mother beaming beside him, a look of pride on her face that now seemed so out of reach. And in that moment, across town, Evelyn lowered her glass, her heart swelling with warmth and peace, unaware of the turmoil still rippling through the house she had once been part of. But for the first time in weeks, Evelyn felt something she hadn't in a long time. She felt at home. And as the laughter echoed around her, she knew, deep down, that she had finally found where she belonged. The old family was lost, but a new one had been born, one she had built on her own. And as the snow continued to fall outside, Evelyn felt a deep, unshakable sense of hope rising within her. The evening had been a soft hum of laughter, the warmth of the fire flickering as the last of the dessert was served. The table was littered with empty plates and crumbs, the scent of mulled wine and apple pie lingering in the air. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, her hands clasped together as she watched her guests, her new family, chatting in comfortable voices. She could feel the weight of the day settling gently into her bones, a satisfying exhaustion. For the first time in ages, she was truly at peace. But then, a knock on the door interrupted the moment. It was quiet at first, barely a tap, but it hung in the air like an omen. The laughter around the table stilled for a heartbeat. Evelyn's gaze flicked toward the door and then to Marjorie, who raised an eyebrow in silent question. Evelyn hesitated. Who could it be? She rose slowly, the room still humming softly behind her, and moved toward the door. She didn't need to check the peephole, she already knew. When she opened the door, the cold air rushed in, a stark contrast to the warmth of the cottage. Standing there, his shoulders hunched against the winter chill, was Connor. Snow clung to his disheveled hair, his coat half-buttoned, and his eyes were red from lack of sleep. Or something more. He looked like someone who had walked miles through the storm, both physically and emotionally. Evelyn studied him for a long moment, the weight of the years between them heavy in the space. His face was a mixture of pain and hesitation, his hands shoved into his pockets, as if he didn't know what to do with them. His voice, when he spoke, was quieter than she'd ever heard it. Vanessa left, he said, his words stumbling out in a quiet rush. After the foreclosure notice, she packed up and left. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't fix it. I couldn't make it right. I thought, maybe you could help. Evelyn said nothing at first. The sound of her guests inside the cottage seemed distant now, muffled behind the door. She could feel her pulse steadying, the rhythm of her breath slowing as she focused solely on him. The boy who used to run to her with scraped knees. The man who had turned away from her when she needed him most. He looked at her, waiting, his eyes pleading. Too proud to beg, but desperate enough to hope she would open the door to him. To them. But Evelyn didn't move. She didn't let her gaze soften, didn't let the pity or the old instinct to nurture creep back in. She had made her choice. The silence between them stretched for a long, taut moment, broken only by the soft thud of her heartbeat in her ears. Finally, Connor's voice came again, softer this time. Can I come in? Just for a moment, I don't have anywhere else to go. Evelyn's eyes flicked to the warmth of the table behind him, the laughter and conversation that felt so far away now. She thought of the meal, the new family she had built, the people who had valued her, and this moment. Her breath caught for just a second, but she exhaled slowly. This table is for those who value it, she said, her voice quiet but firm. The words hung in the air, heavy, undeniable. Connor flinched, as though the words had struck him. He opened his mouth to say something, but the words died on his lips. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Instead, he stood there, the cold air swirling around him, his face unreadable. Evelyn waited, her hand still on the doorknob, not letting go. The decision wasn't made for him. It was for her. for what she had built. She had nothing left to give him if he didn't see it too. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he dropped his gaze. His shoulders sagged slightly, the tension leaving his frame as he stepped back, slowly, reluctantly. "I understand," he whispered. Evelyn's chest tightened as she watched him take a step back into the darkness, the snow falling steadily around him. But just as the door was about to close, her hand moved without thought. She opened the door a fraction more, and her voice was quieter this time, almost a whisper. "You can come in," she said, her words soft but clear. "For a moment. But only if you understand what that means." Connor's eyes lifted to hers, a flicker of something, gratitude, regret, or maybe both, flashing across his face. He nodded slowly, stepping inside, the cold air slipping past him as he crossed the threshold. As the door closed behind him, Evelyn turned toward the table. The laughter inside continued, the warmth wrapping around her like a blanket. The past was still there, but so was the present, the people who mattered, and the life she had built with her own hands. For the first time in a long while, she felt a quiet sense of peace settle over her. But she knew one thing. This time, the door would only open for those who truly understood what it meant to walk through it. And no matter how hard it was, she was ready to let go of the past. Connor sat at the far end of the table, his chair slightly angled away from the others, a physical reminder of the emotional distance he felt. The room hummed with laughter and light, but to him, the sounds felt muffled, as though they were coming from behind a thick wall. His mother, Evelyn, sat at the center of the table, her face glowing in the warm light, her laughter mingling with the easy chatter of her guests. She was happy, happier than he remembered, surrounded by people who cared about her. His eyes followed her movements, studying the way she smiled and engaged with the group, her hands gesturing as she spoke. There was a sense of ease in her that Connor hadn't seen in years, a sense of peace. It was a version of his mother that didn't involve him, and the realization stung more than he expected. He had thought he would come back, ask for help, and everything would somehow return to the way it had been. But it wasn't the same. The life she had built without him, the connections she had fostered, were real, and he was no longer a part of it. Evelyn's face lit up as someone cracked a joke, her eyes sparkling with laughter. Connor's chest tightened, the ache of loss threatening to consume him. She had moved on, and he had only himself to blame. In the silence that followed, he whispered, barely audible, "I'm sorry, Mom." The words hung in the air, but they seemed to disappear, swallowed by the noise around him. No one heard. He wasn't sure she did either. Her focus remained on the group, her attention consumed by the people who mattered now. Connor shifted uncomfortably in his chair, unsure of what to do next. Marjorie, sitting beside Evelyn, nudged her gently, her voice soft but insistent. "You should acknowledge him, Evelyn." Evelyn's gaze flickered to him. There was no anger in her eyes, just a steady, quiet understanding. Her lips parted as if she might speak, but instead, she gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. But there were no words of forgiveness, no comforting embrace. Connor sat back in his chair, the weight of the unspoken truth settling over him. He had hoped for absolution, for something to undo the distance he had created, but he knew now. Forgiveness wasn't freely given. It was something that had to be earned. And in that silence, Connor realized just how much he had lost. The morning light spilled over Burlington, a soft, pale glow that seemed to settle over the snowy streets like a promise. The air was crisp, the world outside still and quiet. Inside, the remnants of last night's celebration lingered, empty glasses, crumbs from the pie, and the faint scent of pine and mulled wine. The house, once quiet and empty, now felt full in a way Evelyn hadn't known in years. One by one, her guests filed out, offering hugs, handshakes, and words of gratitude. They lingered at the door for just a moment longer than necessary, as if savoring the warmth of the place, the sense of belonging they hadn't expected to find. Evelyn stood at the threshold, her heart full, watching each of them leave. She knew they had all come expecting nothing, but each had found something: laughter, community, a moment of peace. The door closed gently behind the last of her guests, and she turned back to the room. There was a lingering quiet now, a peaceful stillness, as if the house itself had settled into a new rhythm. But there was still one person left at the table: Connor. He hadn't moved from his seat, his eyes fixed on the door even after it had closed. He was still here, but he didn't belong. Not yet. Evelyn walked over to him, her footsteps soft against the floor. She didn't need to say much. Not anymore. He knew. His shoulders were slumped, his gaze downcast, his hands clasped together in his lap, as if he were waiting for permission to leave. "I don't want to stay," he said quietly, almost to himself, his voice cracking. I don't know what to do." Evelyn studied him for a long moment. She saw the boy he once was, the boy who had run to her for comfort, but she also saw the man who had broken her trust so many times. She had let him in tonight, but that didn't mean everything was healed. "You don't have to leave, Connor," she said softly, "but you do need to rebuild. One step at a time. Trust isn't given freely, not anymore. It has to be earned. Brick by brick." Connor swallowed, nodding slowly, his face flushed with shame. For the first time in years, Evelyn saw the weight of his actions in his eyes. He was humbled, not by her words, but by the truth they carried. He looked up at her, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll do what it takes." Evelyn nodded, a small sigh escaping her lips as she turned to leave him with his thoughts. She knew the road ahead for him would be long, but it was his now to walk. Later, Evelyn sat by the window, a steaming mug of cocoa in her hands. The snow continued to fall outside, dusting the world in soft layers of white. The house was quiet now, peaceful, and Evelyn let herself sink into it. She felt the weight of the last year lift off her shoulders, the cycle of disappointment and sacrifice finally broken. She had canceled more than a mortgage, she realized. She had canceled the cycle of disrespect, of being taken for granted. She had broken free from the chains that had kept her tethered to a version of family that never truly saw her. And now, for the first time in a long time, she was free. The future was uncertain, but as the snow fell gently outside, Evelyn allowed herself to believe in it again.